Well, apparently January 2023 is the month for dealerships and automakers to raise prices, despite the fact that we are in a market where demand is continuing to diminish. And we're going to talk about this whole situation in today's video. But before we get into it, as always, if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. And then if you want to see more videos just like this, then I recommend you subscribe because I post content every single day. And if you want to see if I eventually shave the beard, then you might as well tag along. Let's get into it. First off, to accurately describe what is happening right now, we have to talk about what happened last month. So last month, a lot of automakers and dealers decided to release some pretty solid incentives to get people to purchase cars at the end of the year. And this is not new news. This pretty much happens every single year because dealers have end of the year goals they want to meet, and then manufacturers also have end of the year goals that they want to meet as well. But the unique situation that we are currently in that is different from, prior years is the fact that we are in a market where, the used market is declining at a very rapid rate. Dealers know this, manufacturers know this, and, new car demand is also diminishing. Like right now, manufacturers are still not up to where they were at in terms of manufacturing capacity prior to the pandemic, and we're still seeing inventories increase. Like with how few cars are actually being manufactured, inventories shouldn't exist, but they do. And so you would think that because of this whole situation that manufacturers and dealers would continue with the incentives to try to get rid of the inventory that we shouldn't have. However, that is not what is happening. Instead, what is happening is, manufacturers have pulled back on the incentives they had in December, so a lot of cemented rates no longer exist, and a lot of those rebates that were happening last month also no longer exist. And then on top of that, a lot of dealers literally overnight from December 31st to January 1st raised these selling prices on not only their new vehicles, but on their pre-owned vehicles as well, which again, when you look at what's happening in the market, it doesn't make any sort of logical sense because wholesale values from December to January have declined. And then when it comes to new vehicles, we now have a bunch of 2022s that are on dealer lots that haven't sold yet. That, the only way the dealer's going to sell them at this point, because it's 2023, is if they put some discounts on them. And same thing with their respective manufacturers. The only way they're going to get rid of that inventory is if they put some freaking discounts on it. So now let's talk about why this is actually happening. First off, from the manufacturer standpoint, they wanted to, put incentives on vehicles towards the end of the year to have an end of the year push. And, some manufacturers met their goal and some manufacturers didn't meet their goal. Now it's January and there's not really a big push for manufacturers to incentivize vehicles. Yes, there are some 2022s that are still on dealer lots that manufacturers need to make sure that, they help dealers get rid of those vehicles, but they're going to wait a little bit. They're probably going to wait until, tax time or potentially after until they put, big incentives on those vehicles to get rid of them because January, historically slow sales month, it doesn't really make sense to discount vehicles when there's just not a lot of people buying in January. Anyways, most buyers are tapped out after December, right? You have a lot of, car shopping happening in December, but then on top of that, you just have a lot of shopping in general because, Christmas. And so there's just not as much, busyness within the retail world. And I can tell you, as someone who does YouTube, it definitely appears that way every single year because in December, advertisers will pay a ton of money to YouTubers, but then as soon as January comes around, they pull back a massive amount in terms of how much they will pay for ads because they assume that those ads are not really going to be acted upon in January compared to December. Now, when it comes to dealers, it's pretty much more of the same, right? December is always a busy month. January is always a pretty slow month. So why discount vehicles when you're just going to have less sales overall? They want to just take bigger swings at every single customer in January. And the thing you notice about customers in January is when they buy a vehicle, it's less of a want and more of a need typically. And when someone's in a situation where they need to buy a vehicle, that's a perfect circumstance for a dealer to, again, be able to take a slightly bigger swing at that customer, make a little bit more money. But it actually goes a little bit deeper than that. So this is more anecdotal, but I think that it's something that's worth talking about. So several dealers that I talk to on a regular basis have actually put pretty substantial price cuts on certain vehicles or on their entire inventory. And they've noticed that this doesn't help them sell those vehicles any better. One dealer in particular basically went from having all their vehicles priced at over MSRP 1 month, and then the next month they priced everything at below invoice because they thought that this would help them basically, kind of liquidate their new car inventory. And what happened is they did not sell any more cars. They literally sold the same amount of cars. And so what that said to them is people are just going to buy whether the prices are higher or lower. It doesn't matter. They're going to buy if they're going to buy. And so dealers are obviously talking amongst each other about this whole situation because, again, some dealers are just holding their prices and other dealers are trying out discounts. It's not like it's this unanimous thing that's happening throughout the market. It's kind of like one dealer will do one thing and another dealer will do another thing. And what they're finding is no matter what they post the vehicles at, they tend to sell the same amount of cars. And so this is leading a lot of dealers to post, basically call for price so that they can get more people to call into their dealership so then they can try to, basically convince the person to buy from them. Or they're just simply not posting prices. Like if it's a new car, what you'll see time and time again is the dealer will just have the car posted for MSRP. There won't be any sales price listed. And then when you call in, maybe they'll have a discount, but chances are it's usually MSRP or sometimes it's even over MSRP in a lot of cases. And so it's this weird kind of like game that they're starting to play because they're trying to figure out the best way to approach this market. Because again, prior to COVID, what you typically saw with most new car dealers and used car dealers is they would try to post the lowest possible price online because they thought if they had the lowest price on a vehicle, then that would attract the most amount of customers. And, again, you'd think that with the market that we're in, that would happen again. But since it's not happening, it's now causing dealers to kind of reorganize. And they're like, okay, what's the best strategy at this point? So now let's talk about how you can use this information to help you out as a buyer as you are navigating the current 2023 market. So first off, when it comes to manufacturers, it looks like they're just going to kind of go back to what they were doing prior to COVID, where during certain times of the year where there's a little bit more of a buying frenzy, they're going to release more incentives to kind of basically, put gasoline on the fire, so to speak. And so basically expect that during tax time, we're probably going to have some incentives. December 2023, we're going to have some incentives. There are going to be some summer incentives. They're going to be pretty much all throughout the year. And, depending on how old a vehicle is will determine how big the incentives are. But basically, manufacturers are going to go back to doing what manufacturers have done for a long time when it comes to incentives. When it comes to dealerships, it's quite a bit more confusing, to be frank, because dealers are now basically trying all sorts of different strategies to navigate this new market because it simply just isn't like what it was during the pandemic, that's for sure, and even prior to the pandemic at this point. And so dealers are going to continue to basically just try out different strategies, and they're basically going to stick with whatever works. And what most dealers are finding what works right now is, again, by posting the MSRP in a vehicle, not putting the sales price, just basically saying that MSRP doesn't reflect sales price so that they don't get themselves in any sort of legal trouble, and then just letting people call into the dealer. And if a person, asks if there's a market adjustment on the vehicle, then chances are the dealer's probably going to say, yeah, there's a market adjustment. You got to pay this much over, because they're hoping that that person doesn't realize that the market's taking a big poop. Or if someone calls in and says, hey, so I hear these are going at invoice, and the dealer's like, well, the best we can do is whatever. You know what I mean? They're going to react based on individual customers at this point. That seems like the strategy that's most commonly used right now. And I think it's just going to take several months for the dust to settle. What I kind of see happening is this is what we're going to see again for quite some time, potentially throughout the entirety of this sales year. But eventually, dealers will go back to what they were doing prior to the pandemic, because we're getting to the point where almost every single manufacturer has enough production capacity compared to the demand that we currently have to where their respective dealers are going to have enough inventory that the dealers are going to have to start competing with each other again. They haven't had to do that for the last couple of years, but they're going to have to start doing that. And so the best way for dealers to compete with each other that have the exact same product is to have the biggest discount posted online. And that might sound like a good thing on the surface to those of you that are consumers, but the big downside with that is you have a lot of fake rebates and everything posted online. This is something that I personally dealt with when I worked at a Ram dealership. If you guys don't know, Ram is like the king of rebates. There's like a rebate for everyone. And so what a lot of dealerships did prior to the pandemic is they would post, these Ram trucks on their website, and then they would post, a price that said as low as, and it would contain every possible rebate on a Ram truck. Now, there's no person on the planet that qualified for every single rebate, and so it would get people to bust the curb, right? They would go into the dealership because they'd see this as low as price, and then the dealership would explain to them, oh, well, you don't have this, 10 other things, and so you only qualify for 2 rebates, not 20 rebates. And so it's good because, we're going to have more competitive pricing online, but in the reality of the situation is it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get any better of a deal later in the future compared to what you'll be able to get now, because as long as you're educated now and you ask the dealer the right questions and you put forth an offer based on, evidence that you have based on your research, then you're going to get the same deal as, down the road when these dealerships basically have these, lower advertised prices. Down the road, it actually might be trickier because, again, then you're going to have to find out, which dealers have real pricing and which dealers don't have real pricing, right? What's the actual, sales price in the vehicle? It'll go back to that BS, which, yeah, that's not fun either. So I guess that's a really long way to say that dealers don't exactly know what they're doing right now, and so they're going to try out a bunch of things, and all you need to know as a consumer is that just because a dealer has a vehicle priced at a certain price, that does not mean that that vehicle is selling for that price. Asking price is a lot different than actual transaction price, and so if you make sure that you are an educated buyer, then, well, you can pay the lowest possible transaction price that the market can manage, and that's frankly what you always want to do. So if your local dealers still have vehicles posted at over MSRP, don't just assume that people are paying those prices, because chances are they're not. Most people at this point, when they go into dealers, they understand the market that we're in, and so they're offering dealers prices at MSRP, in a lot of cases under MSRP in these vehicles, and sometimes the dealers take the deals, sometimes they don't. They're stupid if they don't, because again, cars are just going to continue to become more and more available as time goes on. That's going to sum things up.